Hey guys, it's Janae with a Mother's Treasure Painting Studio. Tonight we're painting this cute surfboard from Diverse Woodworking. I have printed out a design I like. I've gotten my tracing paper and then I just traced it right onto the surfboard. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work on our base coat around the entire piece, and then we're going to come in with a liner brush and outline the design. So it's going to take a little time to do these smaller outlines, but the rest of it should fill in pretty quickly. You can see for this larger area, I'm using the large flat brush. Nothing fancy, just loading it up and sweeping over the entire piece until I get down here around the design, and I'll slow down and make sure I don't overlap that, but you just go right up to it. I'm using this Admiral Blue. It is one of my favorite colors. I think it's going to be beautiful with the green and the teal that I'm going to use on the turtle and the waves. So I think it's going to look really pretty. Just go ahead and use that same brush and get as close to the design as you can. Cover as much space as you can with this larger brush. It'll just help things go a little faster, because we're going to get into some smaller details in a little bit, and that's going to slow things down quite a bit. You can see I'm using this same big brush to try to get the edges. I'm turning it sideways and using the sharper edge of my brush to try to give it an outline and get as close as possible. So I want to fill up as much space as I can with this bigger brush. So that's about as close as we're going to get. We're going to zoom in, and now I've gotten a smaller flat brush, and you can see I'm just turning it on its edge as well, and I'm going to go around this outline and then fill in as much as I can with the medium brush before we have to go down to an even smaller brush. These details are quite tedious, but it's going to be beautiful in the end. One of the things that you'll notice I just did was I covered over a little bit of one of those dots. That's okay, don't worry about that. The dots are going to be really easy to do later on, so if you happen to cover over them, don't worry about it at all. Okay, so now over here on this side, I feel like I really need to move down to an even smaller brush. I'm going to use a small round tip brush, and a lot of people refer to it as a liner brush. It's just going to fit a lot better in these little nooks and crannies. Now I'm just going to fill in this little area here with my liner brush, and then we'll move on to doing our second coat. And you know, I've decided these little bubbles are not worth trying to preserve, so I'm just going to paint over them, and then I'll come back and add them at the end. And they're going to be much easier to add than they were for me to try to paint around. Now we'll just go ahead and add our second coat. Then I don't know if you are aware, but the second coat always goes much faster because you don't have to cover so much area. You're just trying to put a little bit more color on there to make sure none of those pieces of wood are shining through on any of the lighter spots. So it should go much faster. So we should be good now. I'm going to go ahead and pick up the hairdryer and dry this off. You'll notice as it's drying that this shininess goes away. That's how you can tell if a piece is dry or if it's still wet, as you won't have a glare if the paint is dry. It'll be completely matte. And so that's always fun to watch it disappear as we're drying it. Okay, so I think I'm going to zoom in again for this next part. It'll be a little easier for you guys to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to paint my little turtle arms green, and I've added a tiny bit of white to my green because I want it to cover better. I don't want it to be quite so transparent. The parakeet green that I'm using does have a tendency to need like more than sometimes even 2 coats. So I added a pinch of white to my green just to give it a little bit more of a solid color. And we're going to do both of his little arms and then his little legs. We'll add a little more white. I didn't feel like it covered quite as much, so adding a little more white now. As you can see, I use my big brush to mix it, but I'll go back to my small brush when I'm applying it. There, I think that looks a lot better. I hope you can see that. Now, even though it's a little bit muted down with the white, we'll go back over it a little while later, just with a quick hit of the straight green color, and it'll make it jump back out and be a little bit more bright. Right now, we're just trying to get it to cover that wood. I love how this green and the navy, or the Admiral blue, they just are so pretty together. Okay, so now we're done with his arms, and we'll move on down here to his little legs while we're at it. Moving on over here to do the waves, I'm going to use a Caribbean blue. I am using a very small flat tip brush. I'm using it because I want to get as much coverage as possible, but also have a tip that's small enough to get into some of these really tight areas. If you press down on the brush a little harder, then you get a thicker line, so it's usually easier to get into these smaller areas, but yet still have a lot of coverage. I'm sure you've noticed that I've left a couple of these areas unpainted on this stream, but that's because I'm going to try to come in here with a little bit of a darker color and make it look almost like it's twisting and turning. So I'm mixing up a little bit of this Caribbean blue with a little bit of the Admiral blue and a tiny pinch of white, and we're going to see if we like it. I'm not sure it's going to be the color that I want, but we'll go over a few areas and see if it looks okay. So I'm going to be honest, I'm not crazy about that color. I'm going to paint this middle section with turquoise and see if I like it better. I think I'm going to like it a lot better, and I may even go over some of these other areas that had that darker blue there where I mixed the Admiral blue and the Caribbean. I'm probably going to go back over those with this turquoise because I think I'm going to like it a lot better. So I do like the turquoise and the Caribbean better, but I'm going to have to go in, unfortunately, and finish applying this mixture of a color that I've got, this Caribbean Admiral blue, because if I don't, this wave is not going to match the other wave, and I want them to look right. So I'm going to go ahead and add this now, let it dry, and I'll come back over it in a little bit with my Caribbean blue and my turquoise. So it's had time to dry a little bit more now, so I'm going to go back over it with my Caribbean blue. I'm going to go back over some of this area here with my Caribbean, and that way it'll match the first one that I did. At this point, I'm taking turquoise and covering this little section that is the darker blue mixture, covering it with turquoise on this first wave that I did because I already had the Caribbean blue. So now I'm adding the turquoise just to give it a little bit of a different shade. Now, it looks to you probably on the screen like I'm adding white, but I'm not. It's just the reflection of the lighting. Once it dries, you'll be able to see the turquoise color much better. For some reason, while it's wet, it just gives this reflection of the light, and it kind of messes with your eyes a little bit. And while I'm doing turquoise, I'm just going to keep doing this second little wave over here. It's time to move on over to my turtle shell. So I've picked up a little bit darker green. I've used that same parakeet, but I've picked up a little tiny bit of Christmas green and mixed in there because I want it to be darker than his arms and legs. And I'm only going to darken one side of his shell just to give him a little depth. I don't want to do the whole shell that same solid color. So I've darkened that left side just a little bit more. And then this right side's not going to have any shading to it at all. Again, it's really hard for you to tell right now while everything's wet that there's a little shading there, but once it's dry, it's going to look really nice. So now I'm going to add my second coat to these waves that I was working on earlier with the Caribbean blue, but I'm also going to come in and pick up a tiny bit of green along the way because I want this to have just the tiniest hint of green along this wave, just to tie in a little bit with my turtle. I'm going in and just doing that same thing on this second wave, and I'll do just like I did a while ago. I'll pick up a little bit of green and we'll make that tie in a little bit more with our turtle. And now I'm just mixing a little bit of a darker green, and I'm going to come in and outline these pieces of his shell. I know you maybe can't see it, but there's still the pencil lines shining through here, so it's perfect. I'm just going right over them with a little bit of darker green with this little tiny liner brush, and it's going to look perfect. I know on the screen it may be looking like it's white or silver, but that's just the reflection of this lighting I have. And once it's dry, you'll be able to see that it is darker green. It's going to look adorable. While we're lining, we'll go ahead and use that same green and give our little arms and legs and the rest of our turtle a little bit of an outline. And you'll notice I'm not trying to give it a perfect outline, and I'm not trying to give it the outline right where those two colors meet. I'm coming in just a little bit and giving it a little outline just on the inside of that original green. Now it's time to outline this seaweed or wave, whatever this is called. I'm going to outline it with Admiral Blue because it's where it meets up to the surfboard color, and I want it to have nice crisp sharp lines. So I'm taking my liner brush and I'm going back over each of these edges with my Admiral Blue, and hopefully a really steady hand because we want this to stand out and be really crisp. Okay, I hope I haven't lost you guys. I know this is really tedious work, but I promise when you're done, you're going to be so glad that you took the time to do it. It's really going to make these little waves pop out, and it's really going to make everything come together. I know that sometimes you get in the middle of this and feel like it's never going to end, and you're like, what have I done? But I promise by the time you get done, you're going to be so glad that you took the time to do this. We're almost done, and then we're going to go moving on to these little bubbles. So now I'm preparing to do the bubbles. You'll notice that I'm not using the bristle end of my paintbrush. I'm using the stick end, dipping it in my paint, and then I'm just going over these areas where the bubbles were. And it's just a solid white bubble, nothing exciting. But the best part is that it's so easy to do with the end of the brush instead of having to use a paintbrush and hope that those lines get straight. You just use this and swirl it around a little bit and you have a perfect bubble. Now remember, I painted over some of these bubbles over here, so I'm just going to go in and add some wherever the mood strikes me. I don't imagine you could ever have too many bubbles, but I guess you could. So I'm just spreading them out a little bit and giving them, see, I don't know what I'm doing. Just giving them a little bit of variation between sizes and spaces. You know, I don't want them on top of each other, but don't want them all the same size either. See how cute. It's all coming together. And now we're back to using the front of our brush, the liner part of our brush, the bristles. We're just going to use that liner brush. We're going to use our white, and we're going to just give a little wispy outline here and there. Nothing too stressful, just a little wisp. The one thing I would warn you about is you're going to want to thin down your white a little bit so that it flows better onto your piece. And in order to do that, you'll just dip your brush a little bit in the water and then let it drip into your white and mix it up. Now, something that I should warn you about is that sometimes if you dip your paintbrush all the way down in the water, you'll get too much water on your paintbrush where the handle is, and it'll actually drip. You can see that right here under my hand. I had a little drip, and I'm just going to cover over it with some white here in a little bit. But if you drip, it kind of makes a little mess, and we've worked way too hard at this point to have any drips. So always keep that in mind and be really careful. I usually try to remember to wipe my brush off after I do that. So now we'll just give these turtle shells a little bit of a white highlight here and there. Using that same little liner brush, just a few little wispies. I'm falling in love with this turtle. I think he's so cute. Give his little arms a few little outlines, and give his head an outline here and there, and all the rest of him. Where all these colors come together. Okay, normally I would outline with black, but this was just so pretty. I hated to do black. It just felt like it would be too dark because of all this dark blue, and I wanted it to stand out, and I thought that may just make it blend in too much. The white just really makes it jump off there. The one thing you may want to do is be sure you spray this to finish it with an acrylic sealer. Right here real quick is where I messed up and had that splotch, so we'll just add a little line, cover it up. But back to what I was saying, you'll want to cover it with an acrylic sealer because this blue will pick up every little smudge if your hand is dirty when you touch it. So when you go to hang it on your door, be sure you spray it with a sealer and it won't collect every little piece of dust that flies by. Now we've zoomed out so you can see it a little bit better, and I'm going to work on the outline of the surfboard itself. For this, I'm using the medium size flat brush. Okay, and this last little bit here, and we are done. I know I'm really tempted to add some words to it, but I don't want to mess it up. I love it the way it is, so we are all done. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you love this as much as I do. Thanks a bunch. We'll see you next time.